All right. Well, we are going to start we've already started our Christmas stories, but we're going to continue that now. And so today we're going to get into a Christmas story. Uh, it's often not talked about much. Just prior to this story, an angel has appeared to probably a teenage girl and said, "Hey, you're going to have a baby," which kind of freaked her out a little bit because she wasn't married and she was a virgin. And so she was kind of like, "Yeah, how's that going to work?" And essentially, Angel was like, "Just God's going to do it. It'll be okay." And her response essentially was, "Okay." And then she's engaged to this guy, and they've gone through all the process of an actual engagement, a betrothal, which is more than our marriage, or excuse me, more than our engagement, the way we would understand it in the West. So much so that if this was broken off, it would require a divorce. And so she, can you imagine? Can you imagine that conversation? They're sitting on the porch on the swing, and Mary goes, "Hey, Joe, I got some news for you, buddy. Uh, I'm pregnant, but it's okay. I'm still a virgin." I mean, have you ever tried to imagine that conversation in your head? Because it took place, right? I mean, there was an actual conversation where Mary shared with her betrothed that she was pregnant, but it was okay because she'd still never been with a man. I just imagine, I think that swing probably stopped in mid stride, right? So, like I was born on a day, but it wasn't yesterday. And so we learn a lot about Joseph because he was going to break off the betrothal and try to do it in such a way that she was not publicly humiliated. But an angel appeared to Joseph and said, "Hey, what she said was legit. That you have to go way into Greek to get that. But that's essentially the Greek for the conversation the angel had with Joseph. All go. And so Joseph married her. They never had marital relations until after the baby was born, which is pretty notable for this guy. And so he married, or he was betrothed to Mary, uh, even though she was pregnant. And in our story, she's very pregnant. Now, in that culture, in those days, uh, Andrew, what's it like in Mexico now if a girl gets pregnant without being married?
Fairly common, actually.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah,
And I can
fairly
only
common.
imagine. Is that the same thing in Ireland, Sam? Just kind of very common.
It's fairly common, but I know of older folk that got pregnant in a different time, and nothing short of horrific.
Yes.
It would have been 50 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
That
would
never
think.
happens in America. Never. Very, very uncommon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't
Hardly.
raise your
Very
hands.
rare.
Yeah.
Didn't raise your hand for
Thank you,
sarcasm.
Andrew. Good call.
I guess as late as early as 15 years ago, it was still. I mean, you could expect a couple to get married 15 to 20 years ago, but after around that time, then is when people it just became more accepted as they didn't use the proper protection. It's more her fault than his fault, and
Yeah.
but I would think as early as 15 years ago, people would still consider it important to get married to that person, even if they knew it would end in divorce.
Yeah. Well, in the story we're reading about today, they were very much an honor shame culture.
Right.
This was this was highly, highly, highly irregular, uh, and not socially acceptable. right? And so, and Rome was the dominant government in the world at that time. And boy, they were so structured, in the way they ruled. I mean, they had positions for everything. I mean, they just really had it together. And so that leads us to our story from God's word. And it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered in a census. Now, this census took place when Quirinius was the governor over the region of Syria. And so everyone was required to go to their hometown. Now, Joseph went from Nazareth, which was in Galilee, to Bethlehem, which was the city of David in Judea, because he was of the house and the line of David. And he took with him his betrothed wife, Mary, who was pregnant. And the time came for her to give birth to her firstborn son. And she wrapped him in swaddling cloths and laid him in a manger because there was no room in the guest house. And there's our story from God's word. All right. So, a shorter story, but so it came to pass in those days that what happened? What was
A decree.
Yeah, a decree was sent forth by Caesar Augustus that who?
Everyone.
Judea?
Yeah,
All the
all the world should be registered. And this happened when Quirinius was what?
Governor of Syria. I
Yeah, the
believe.
governor over
Governors.
Syria. And so what did everybody do? Do you remember?
They had to travel to their hometowns.
Yeah, everybody had to go to their hometown to register. And Joseph went from Nazareth in Galilee to Bethlehem in Bethlehem, the city of David in Judea, because he was what?
Of the line of David.
Lineage of David.
Yeah, of the house and the line of David. Yeah, you're right. And he went. He knew it was going to be a dangerous journey, so he went by himself.
Didn't raise your hand again either. You didn't raise your hand. He went with his pregnant wife, who was
he
betrothed
took
to
his
him.
betrothed pregnant wife with him. And when they got to Bethlehem, what time was it? Time for her.
Oh, to give birth.
Yeah, to give birth to her
It's around midnight,
Firstborn.
her firstborn son. And
Wrapped
She
him up,
wrapped him in swaddling clothes.
Laid him in a manger.
laid him in a manger.
laid him in a manger because
There wasn't any room in the
There
guest
was
house.
no room.
was no room in the guest house or inn, depending on which version you use. I'm using the Butch Vernon version, which says guest house. So, what do you think it might have been like for, and we're not told exactly how old Mary was, but if this was a typical woman in those times, she's probably a teenager, more than likely mid-teens, if this was the way things normally worked in that culture. So, what do you think it might have been like for a teenager to be pregnant without being married? What do you think that might have been like for her emotionally, living where she lived? Scary. Yeah.
It'd be very different because you wouldn't have your husband right there doing all the normal things with you.
Okay.
So instead, I assume she was still living with her parents at that time.
Probably.
Aside from the time that she was with Elizabeth. But yeah, so she had to kind of work through all of that stuff by herself. Well, not kind of by herself, just in a different way, really.
Okay. right?
It would have been really weird. Or she might have been weirded out because she never had sex with Joseph. So
Yeah, that'd be a
You
whole
know,
different.
if I remember correctly, she did spend some time with her cousin
Yeah,
first, who was also miraculously pregnant. So there may have been some mutual support there that helped her talk to Joseph about it. So there might have been some fear, some trepidation, but for the most part, acceptance, I think. And let's move forward. Let's see what the next step is.
okay. You mentioned
Would
acceptance.
there,
I wonder, do you think people in her village, in her town, Nazareth, think they were really accepting of a young pregnant girl?
I think
I
they're
would not. Go
I think
ahead. I'm sorry.
quasi-accepting.
Okay, in what way, Diane?
In that, if Joseph accepts her, there's only so much they can disapprove. If Joseph rejects her, that's a different story. But just like today, just like in the past, if the young man married the young woman that he'd gotten pregnant, not that Joseph, but if you
Right.
got married,
Right.
then that kind of like cuts your shame maybe down to a quarter.
Okay. All right.
So you didn't get out of it, scot-free, but people are like, yeah, they rallied. And
Sam, what are you thinking?
I'm just wondering, going back to his hometown and where he's from, there maybe would have been a bit of fear that his family might have talked sense into him, which wouldn't have been good for her health.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Uh,
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, not good for her health.
Well,
I'm thinking, Butch, I'm thinking
yeah.
more that she accepted her situation.
Right. Yes. Right. I knew what you were
She
saying.
accepted.
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
accepted it.
I knew what you were saying, but when you said that word, it triggered that thought in my head. So, well, let's look at the first part of this story. So it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world was to be registered, and this happened when Quirinius was the governor of Syria, and so everyone went to their hometown to register. So we'll just stop right there. Now, when it says a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that everyone had to register, so does that include the Chinese and the pygmies in the middle of Africa?
all the world that counts, because like the World Series of baseball, not so much.
Hey, you're treading
The
on
Miss Universe
holy ground
contest.
there. So I hate baseball, so I don't care.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's a great example, Diane.
I think when he said everybody, is everybody that is paying taxes to them.
Yeah. Those who are part of the Roman Empire. Yeah, that's good. Well,
I think it's whoever they can get away with forcing to do it. Because I think, on the frontier, there were still some tribes and whatnot that they were semi-domesticating. And so wherever Roman civilization ruled, that was the whole world to them. The only one, the world that counted so far as they're concerned.
Yeah. Well,
Like that. Oh, go ahead.
Well,
It's like the government of certain nations that they force the laws only if the people let them.
Yeah, and Rome was Rome had some authority. I mean these guys didn't mess around. Well, I find it interesting. We're told this census happened when Quirinius was governor over Syria, right? So, and we're not going into a history lesson here or anything, but what might we learn about God that he had a specific name of a specific man written in the story of his son's birth, when there were going to be people who read this that knew that history? I mean, this was not that far from the time it happened. So what do we learn about God? What might we learn about God from the fact that he had this very specific information shared that could be checked out by the early readers?
He has no accepted the people.
Okay.
Some people might have known who he was and some people might not have. I mean, if I make
Yeah.
a reference to President Carter, a lot of people are not going to know what I'm talking about, but a few people will. And so it seems that there's certain people that God might want to include in understanding this a little bit more.
Yeah, Diane.
I'm thinking that this guy is not probably such a big deal, because I would say he doesn't get to be in two censuses. He's a one census guy. And so that's why you can say, when Quirinius was governor, oh, and by the way, there was a census going on, and it's, he didn't really make it around to that second one. So this is specific enough. You could have picked some other more important ruler, but he might have gone past several census, and now we haven't really nailed it down.
Well, for the readers, when this was initially shared, right? Is this one of those facts that could be easily checked for those people? A little more difficult for us.
Yeah, you just ask.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But what about for the early readers, the initial readers?
Yeah, you're talking 50-year span is all really. I mean, there should be someone who remembers that. Hey, Grandpa, who was the governor of Syria when you had to do that census? Oh, I think it was I don't remember. Jimmy Carter, I think. The Cuban Missile Crisis happened, something like that.
Then when did you change your name?
Oh, I noticed that there's a Santa Claus on here.
Yeah.
So I wonder what that might tell us about God, that he's willing to put something that can be checked in the story at its initial reading. I mean, does it seem like he wants us to be able to trust?
Trust might be an important thing. God might, appreciate trust.
Well, let me ask you another question. Does God care about people's happiness?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
So the last part of this first section says, so everyone had to go to their hometown. What do you guys think? Do you think that was inconvenient for anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Huh. Do you think they were happy?
Get to see family. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Sam?
I'm sure a lot of people were already in their hometown.
It for some it won't be nice, but for some going home is really not. For my wife, going home to Brazil is party time.
Yeah.
Seeing everyone, it's exhausting, and but you have to do it, and it's always good.
Yes.
And you have to think for the folk back then, it's kind of the same kind of thing.
Right. Well, do you think there's anybody else kind of in Joseph and Mary's situation that, I mean, it wasn't like they got on a bus. It wasn't like they, found a cheap flight. I mean, was this a difficult thing for many people?
It's
Sure, for some it might have been
yeah,
different.
big journey, dangerous roads.
So let me say it. Me speak English. Me speak for a living. So what might we learn about God from the fact he was willing to inconvenience the entire known world so his son would be born in the right place?
I don't think that's the only reason. It could be that God wanted family to be back together for a while too.
Okay.
Mm. It's like chess, but on a totally different level than we can comprehend.
Yeah, even Spock couldn't play this game. So, yeah.
That's a good illustration there, but I tell you what.
Yeah. That's good.
See, Butch, I think this. I think that everything that happens for my benefit and for the kingdom,
Mhm.
whether I agree with it or not, or whether I think it's good for me or not. So I think that's a universal thing with God. That's just, I don't know where that is in the story, but I think that if Joseph has to go back to his hometown and take his wife with him because it's important that she be with him, um, you know, there's got to be more than just one reason for it, I think.
Well, let's look at that next part of the story since we're talking about Joseph there. So Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth, into Bethlehem, the city of David, which was in Judea, because he was of the house and line of David. And he took with him his betrothed wife, who was a wee bit pregnant. And the time came for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths and laid him in a manger because there was no room in the guest house. So, so let's look at this whole Joseph going to Bethlehem because he was the house and line of David. I mean, does that seem like that's pretty impressive? I mean, what do we learn about Joseph from the fact that's his lineage? I mean, what does that tell us about him?
It tells us, well, I'm having to think, probably from David, that's quite a big kind of family.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
he's just one wee piece of sand in it. But it's also the prophecies from the Old Testament. It kind of fits in neatly with them.
He has a legitimate claim to the throne, no matter how far-fetched it might be. I mean, you look at some of the guys that took over the throne and a little weird, but they did.
Wasn't it prophesied that he was going to be born in Bethlehem or no?
Yeah, and that's a story we're going to look at in 2 weeks. I'm actually going to be doing that story not this Sunday, but next Sunday at church. The story of the wise guys. But yeah, there was definitely a prophecy there.
Yes. So the reason why, to now answering your question, Joseph needed to go to Bethlehem to be able to fulfill God's prophecy and God's promise.
Okay.
Because whenever God says a prophecy or says something he's going to do, he always makes sure to do it how he said he's going to do it.
Yeah. Well, it says he took his wife with him. His very, very pregnant wife. Did he have other choices than taking her with him on this journey?
Could have left her, but also could have brought several other people to help with that too.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
But look for a second. If he leaves her, there's the conflict that might happen because you deceived my son, or you caused this problem for my son, and he's doing this for your benefit, kind of thing. And there could be that conflict with the in-laws. This is kind of convenient in a sense that nobody in Bethlehem, or most people in Bethlehem, don't know what's going on with her and him. And the people in Nazareth don't know when the baby's born.
Oh.
And so it's not really polite to look at the marriage certificate and compare that to the birth certificate and see how many months passed.
Well, you mentioned something there, Andrew. So they were still betrothed at this point, right? So there hadn't been a marriage per se.
It says wife. You said the
Does
story
say
says
wife.
wife. Does
So
say
what do you
wife.
guys,
So there
what do you
was
guys see there? I mean, there's
somebody got married.
huh. I wonder if it
Well,
could
they
be
were going to
possible.
be living together, so they needed to get married.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's possible that there might be people in Nazareth who looked down on Mary. We're going to see later on in the Gospels. If I've told you guys, I've been camping out in the Gospels this whole year. That's all I've been reading in the Bible is the Gospels and Acts every day. And I have been really not impressed in a good way, but it's just like, whoa, I've not seen this before. How many times the inference is made that Jesus is a bastard throughout the Gospels. I mean, it is just incredible how often that is brought up when you just focus on the Gospels. And so as I was going over this story, I couldn't help but wonder, is it possible that Joseph, even though Mary was in this advanced state, that he took Mary with him to get her out of the toxic situation she was in there in Nazareth with people going pss, 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 pss. I mean, could that be?
It, maybe for her life to because some of them could have done the decent thing and did away with her for him.
Yeah,
It's the Middle East, they do the decent thing.
yeah, stoned her.
Stoned her, pat in the back for him.
Yeah,
Mary sort of shocked people by coming back from her aunt's too soon.
okay.
There's a long tradition of teenage girls going to visit with a relative and coming back 9 or 10 months later or a year. And so probably when she's gone for a while, everybody just kind of assumes that's what's going to happen. And then she just comes back just full blown pregnant. What's with that? So she's not there that long in Nazareth.
Well, now, typically, people stay with relatives when they go to visit. I mean, Sam is looking to go to Scotland next weekend. Are you guys going to stay at a Holiday Inn?
Nope. We're going to sleep in the van and then sleep at my dad's.
Okay. All right. I mean, and for most of us that have family, I mean, Andrew, you guys were here in the States for quite a while. And I know you didn't fully stay at your dad's the whole time because you have a family of like 438 people. So it makes it a little difficult.
We
dad
stay in hotels as little as possible because it's expensive.
yeah, yeah.
And
And
yeah, we're missionaries.
well, and in the days this was written, the inns were basically brothels. From what we can
Really?
what we know.
Wow.
I mean, they were not
What is that?
they were not places you would want to bring a family, let's say. And so would seem normal that they would stay with a family, right?
This is also what I was wondering too. Where's his
There's-
family?
There's a problem though. There's so much family there.
Yes.
There's just a whole lot of family. And you know how family gets prioritized?
Yes.
Grandma and grandpa are going to get the master bedroom. The masters of the house are perhaps going to move out to another room to make some room. And the next thing you know, the kids are in the living room.
Yeah, and I
She's pregnant,
I see that.
so I feel like she should be pretty high priority.
Bam, there we go. I mean, we've got a woman.
Like I feel
who's
like just about
9.
anyone would be like, "Oh my gosh, you're about to have birth! Like, take my room, please."
Yeah, you got a woman whose pumpkin is about to explode, right? So the fact they didn't prioritize the very pregnant Mary, what might that tell us about the family relationship as it's going on there? I mean, what do you guys see?
It doesn't move her to the top of the list.
Maybe they thought it was just an old random baby that was going to be born. Because I really believe if they would have known that it's the Son of God that's going to be born, they would definitely say, "Oh, there sure plenty of them. Come on in."
Yeah, but
Maybe she was not the only pregnant woman there at that time. I mean,
okay.
there's, I mean, let's see, in my family right now, I think there's been 2 great grandbabies born to my father in the last 6 months or
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
And so we're not a big Jewish family, but I mean,
Well, bringing that up about, okay, her pregnancy should have moved her to the top of the list. I like what you said there, Sarah.
mhm.
Could it be because were there rumors traveling around the world before the invention of the telephone or the internet? Was
No.
was it still possible for rumors to travel?
No.
I would suspect if it's anything like Ireland, they travel faster than the telephone or the internet. You would suspect 8 months before they got there, everyone knew the whole story to a T, and
Yeah.
15 different versions of it.
So I
I don't know. The Proverbs tell us not to gossip. I'm sure the Jewish family would obey that.
Yeah. How's that work in the church in Mexico there, Andrew? I would ask you to give a testimony, but I've got to make a phone call in 45 minutes. So
Yeah, about as well as it does in the United States. I imagine.
It's not necessarily gossiping. Sometimes just sharing prayer requests.
Yeah.
amen. Pray for Joseph. He married this loose teenage girl. Diane, what you said about her being pregnant, not necessarily moving her to the top of the list. I wonder if it's possible that the fact she was so pregnant was the reason she got moved to the bottom of the housing list.
Mm.
Or was she, she could have been out on the street. My understanding of their homes, they were split level, a couple of rooms just.
Right.
So
They had no respect
hmm.
in the guest house.
you know what Sam mentioned, I think is interesting. Uh, we tend to think of being with the animals as this, oh my goodness, can't believe that kind of thing. Is it possible that in this day and time that wasn't nearly the big deal that we would think, you know, that in our culture we would think of? Could it be that God is trying to give us a contrast of his son being born a king as opposed to the expectation the world would have of a king being born? I mean, what do you guys think?
It it God's looking after all his physical needs without any of the fancy luxuries of status or anything like that. He's got some central heating in the term of animals.
Yeah.
Nice sweet cradle for him to go in. It with the hay or the straw or whatever. So
And we
wanna-
don't know about this whole animals or how that's working in terms of what the space is. One year I got a doll and I wrapped it in swaddling clothes and I put it in a laundry basket and I put it next to my tree, my Christmas tree. Because I'm like, well, you know, what would I wrap it if a woman had a kid in my house and I'm like, oop, gotta improvise a crib. What am I gonna use? And I thought, laundry basket. But that does not mean that the child was born and then stayed in the laundry room. You know, it's just a sign that this was appropriated as a crib substitute.
Yeah, yeah. I was in Haiti right after the earthquake, and we had a lady give birth at one of the clinics, that emergency clinics that were set up, and I've got the picture to this day. We put the baby in a box that reams of paper were, you know, were delivered in. Baby in a box. She made the newspapers all over the place.
I would like to make a comment.
Okay, John.
Usually, well, whenever a woman is giving birth, it's painful. So I can just imagine that Mary had a miserable time, because apart from the pain she was going to have, Jesus was born in is it called a stable, where the manger was. And there were probably a whole bunch of animals there. And I can just imagine, like, needing to smell all of the goats' poop and all of the horses' poop. It wouldn't make a good combination.
And we don't know that the animals are there. Animals don't live inside buildings. They come inside buildings at night. We're not told what time of day she has the baby. You know, it could be that the animals are all out in the fields and this is just a place, wherever it is, it's just a place that we're using.
Yeah.
Well,
I tend to view it as at night because those, you know, those shepherds come running.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
but this baby may be, you know, several hours old by the time the shepherds are told to come.
It just shows the humility. And you're right, Diane. That might be true. But it just shows the humility of all three of them. Actually, of all four of them. Because Mary and Joseph, that they are willing to have a baby probably not a comfortable place. I remember that Jesus, who is king, who is accepting to be born in that place. It makes him a really humble king.
Yeah.
And God,
Yeah.
that is the creator of everything, and he is the king of kings and everything. For him to accept that his son to be born in such a place like that, it talks a lot about God.
Yeah. And speaking of God, in the story, we see that, that God was willing to inconvenience some people to make sure that his son was born in the right place at the obviously the right time. We talked about that some in our last story. Uh, I mean, today is God still? Are there still times God inconveniences people to accomplish His will?
COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Good example. I was going to ask, can you think of what? Yeah, COVID. Uh, I mean, I don't think most of us would have chosen this, right?
Speak for
Uh,
yourself.
and yet, man, we've seen amazing results, but because of being forced to stretch, right? Uh, and what are some other ways you can think of that God might inconvenience people to accomplish His will?
I think God maybe wanted to expose and show the people who are following false prophets that the people that they are following are false prophets. So then he sent COVID to maybe expose them. Maybe.
Okay, all right, yeah, Andrew,
Can I share a story about inconvenience?
I would love to hear how you were inconvenienced.
So I was driving with a big 15 passenger van, and I had several of my children in the van at the time. And it was a Sunday, and I was going to preach, and I was dressed in my Sunday clothes. And those big 15 passenger vans have those big tires on them. And this had the 16.5-inch tire on it. And it didn't blow out, it peeled. The tire peeled off. And that's just a terrible feeling when your front tire or rear, I don't remember which one it was, peels off, and then you hear it banging on the car. And then you know that you're driving for about 2 more minutes before you're going to be on the rim. And so that happened. And I said, oh God, I do not want to have to change my tire. Help me, Lord. Send me a Mexican to change the tire for me. And I was in the United States at the time, in Texas. And I pulled into one of those convenience stores, a 7-Eleven or something there. And the thing is, I didn't have a jack that worked. I didn't have a spare. I didn't have else what I needed. And I don't have AAA. And if I did, it would have been in 2 hours before they show up, And I probably did have roadside service with my insurance, but again, you're talking 2 hours. And so I got out of the car, and I'm dressed, in my Sunday tie and shirt, white shirt, of course. And so I asked this guy that I'm parked next to, I said, sir, do you have a jack that I could borrow to change my tire with? And he just ignored me and just got in his car and said no in the rudest way and took off. And there was a Mexican man next to him, Latin American at least, in an old beat up truck. And so I talked to him in Spanish, and I said, sir, do you have a jack that I could borrow to change my tire? The tire just blew apart. And he said yes. And he got out, and the way Mexicans walk and the way Americans walk are just two completely different things. You can tell someone's from Mexico just by the way they walk, with their head down, shorter steps, their chest not expanded, as big as it can get. And I knew he was from southern Mexico. And so I asked him, where are you from? You're from southern Mexico somewhere. And he said he was from this village somewhere. And I said, oh, okay, I've been to that village or close to it. I told him I've been to the city anyway. And so we started talking, and he got his jack out, and he wouldn't let me do it. And he wanted to change the tire himself. And so I spent the time talking to him and invited him to come to where we were going to share that night. And I prayed for him. I shared the gospel with him a little bit, told him to come to church to hear more. And it was just a really pleasant conversation and time. And it started out as a very inconvenience to me.
Yeah.
That here I am, I'm going to ruin my shirt. I'm going to ruin my pants. I'm going to ruin my tie. My hands are going to be full of grease. And it turned out to be, wow, this really wasn't that bad a deal after all. And this guy from a place where I've been close to, if not to the actual place, got to hear the gospel. And that probably opened the door for us to share. One of the real blessings of God of being a missionary for so many years and an evangelist is that we've gone border to border, coast to coast to, I mean, hundreds of little places where we shared at. And so to run into somebody who's been to some little town, it's not beyond the realm of normality. It happens more often than you think, but to happen in the United States was quite pleasant, actually. And so even though it was an inconvenience, at the same time, it worked out well. We got to the church on time and shared and I've remembered that story for 10, 15 years now.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was at a church, and the guy was sharing about how he was on his way to serve the Lord, and his basically his car engine blew up, and so he pulled over and he was praying, Lord, I'm going to serve you. Come on, what is this about? I don't have any money. This is tough. And so he called a tow, and the wrecker pulled up, and he was in the front seat, and he was just kind of moping, like, oh, Lord, what are you up to? And the Lord said, I want you to share with this guy. And so he's like, oh, kind of, you ever whine pray? Yeah, so he kind of whine prayed. And then he started sharing with this guy. Well, this guy came to faith in Christ and basically found out, didn't necessarily say the guy was suicidal, but the guy was like, yeah, you got here just in time, kind of deal. And, and it ended up costing the guy a lot of money. But he was sharing, he said, it was inconvenience. Didn't have the money. God made up the money later, but we had to do it first. He said, but I just really realized that inconvenience was nothing compared to this guy's salvation.
Yeah, let me share something similar to that. Is that I was driving back to Mexico, in Mexico, close to Mexico City, and this car pulled over right in front of me, and I just really felt to pull over. So I pulled over behind him, and it turned out to be a pastor with his family whose car just broke down. And I was able to take him another 30 minutes to his house and drop him off there. It was just really interesting. Sometimes those things happen, and you're on the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Not being the inconvenience party, but helping the inconvenience party. So
yeah, kind of those divine accidents, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, hopefully in the future this might help us. And I'm cheating because I'm gonna have to get off here and go make a phone call. But this might help to remind us that when we are inconvenienced, rather than whine praying, we might want to stop and say, "Okay, Lord, how is it you want to use me? How is it you want to use this situation?" And then just trust the Lord to do what only He can do. So,
Amen.
Well, this story is in Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. And next week we'll do the shepherds, which is that's actually going to be really good for me because on Christmas Eve, when is Christmas Eve?
Thursday.
Thursday? Okay.
That's
I just found out just as we were getting started. I found out I'm going to be doing the Christmas story for a combined Christmas Eve service. So next week you guys will actually you helped me today, but you'll continue to help me with that next week. So I'm going to hit stop here.